to Atamanki and Kufuridia. Had a good time, and just last 3 days just been resting. I went for a swim, and my wife is in Accra. Hopefully she'll be home tomorrow. She just spent some time with her family. And even though I was swimming today, when I was coming back, I visited 2 villages and gave some children some toffees and drinks. So it's not my work day today, but I couldn't resist just blessing the children today. So we had so many children coming to the taxi, and I was just giving them toffees and drinks, and they were so happy. As you know, Hamza is not going to be debating me. He's busy, and that's fine. I'm happy that he's told me. I don't want to be wasting my time preparing for a debate that's never going to be. Having said that, I thought I'd just share with you some evidences for the historical reliability of the Gospels. There's various criteria. There's criteria of multiple attestation. That means the more sources you have that confirm your position, the better. And you've got Josephus, Tacitus, you've got the Gospels, you've got the Church Fathers, you've got so many multiple attestation that it's embarrassing. In other words, if you're an ancient historian, you'd be so blessed to have the 4 Gospels with all the multiple attestation. Then you have enemy attestation. Like I said, if your enemies attest to what you're saying. Josephus attests to the basic core of the Gospel in his statement where he talks about the death and resurrection of Christ. F.F. Bruce says, even though many scholars say it's been in interpolation, that it could be that Josephus is being sarcastic. But the main thing is that F.F. Bruce says, which is interesting, textually, all the manuscripts have this issue of Josephus mentioning Jesus died and that the Christians believed in the resurrection, which is quite amazing. So you have enemy attestation, you have multiple attestation, the criteria of embarrassment. Why is it that why would the gospel writers write that Peter and the other apostles ran away at the cross? Why? There's no reason for that unless they're telling the truth. So that's another attestation. Archaeological evidence. So many evidences of archaeology. We found an inscription of Pontius Pilate. We found a nail in someone's foot that proves that there was crucifixion in the time of Jesus. So many archaeological evidences confirming the 4 Gospels. The biographical. How do we know that they wrote it? Now this is where we get into some detail and where we kind of just going to show you how modern scholarship can be utterly crushed, utterly demolished. Modern scholarship has said for over 100 years that the Gospels were anonymous, okay? And they bang on about that. And one of the reasons is they say that it was Chinese whispers over many, many years. Anonymous people edited the Gospels and created these stories, and it's not really authentic Jesus. Bultmann is a scholar in the 60s that propagated this, and many other scholars from the 19th century, C.F. Bauer is another example, who developed these kind of ideas. Well, these ideas were dealt a death blow on a number of occasions, but have still persisted. The first death blow was J.B. Lightfoot, who did scholarship on Ignatius. Lightfoot did massive scholarship on Ignatius. Now, Lightfoot was a late 19th century scholar, bishop, and he did some remarkable scholarship on working out which are the authentic letters of Ignatius. When he'd worked that out, it was a massive blow against this idea that the Gospels developed over a long period of time. The reason being is Ignatius is referring to the Gospels, which, if Ignatius is late 1st, early 2nd century, puts the Gospels into the 1st century. That was the first death blow, but modern scholarship just ignored Lightfoot. sidestepped life. Probably one of the greatest scholars of all time. He was a brilliant scholar and did amazing work on Ignatius scholarship. That was the first death blow. The second death blow was the manuscript that we found, which has the trial of Jesus. It's only a small little piece of manuscript, and which goes back. It's at Ryland's Library, and it goes back to early 2nd century, and it's an inscription from the Gospel of John, putting the Gospels clear, the Gospel of John clearly in the 1st century written. Now this is important because modern scholarship for over 100 years says no, the Gospel of John was written from 90, even going up into the 2nd century. So the Ignatian scholarship, the manuscript scholarship, demolish it. But then we've recently had some more scholarship that has also dealt a death blow to the Bultmann paradigm. One of the issues is about oral tradition. Rabbis in that time, in the time of Jesus, could memorize on average 1 million words. That's what they were taught to memorize. The 4 Gospels are not even over 100,000 words when you put it all together. So the oral tradition of that time, they were taught to memorize quite exponentially. Secondly, Bart Ehrman said that the Gospels could not have been written by anybody of that time, because by John or Matthew or Luke or Mark, because they were not educated. They didn't have the ability to write. There were at least 300. Some scholars, like Erdesheim, have said there were 600 synagogues in and around Jerusalem. These synagogues were educational centers. Also, Rome made sure that in every city there were key libraries. So there was plenty of opportunity for Jewish young people to be educated. Also, fishermen were not the working class, they were more like middle class of that time. They were quite comfortable off. So they had access, they had the finances to get access to education. But also the synagogues provided free education for some who couldn't afford it. So, and the other one is Matthew was a person who was a scribe for the collecting taxes. So the idea that they were not educated enough to write the Gospels is smashed to the ground. There's also a passage in the book of Revelation where Jesus says, go and write. So that's obvious that there was writing in the 1st century by the disciples. So they would have taken notes. They were well able to memorize, and they were well educated to be able to actually write things down and produce the gospel. So the Bart Ehrman theory that they couldn't have written it is smashed to the ground. Now, one of the other pieces of information that smashed Bart Ehrman and smashed the modern scholarship is this. The modern scholars claim that the 4 Gospels are anonymous. But actually, if you actually do research, in-depth research, by someone like Gatherscon, Dr. Gatherscon, who did some in-depth research, if you look at all the titles of the Gospels, 4 Gospels, they all have Gospel of John for John, Gospel of Mark for Mark, Gospel of Luke for Luke, Gospel of Matthew for Matthew. At no point do we see any of the manuscripts without these titles on. Now the titles can go like this, the Gospel according to Matthew or according to Matthew. Sometimes it's shortened. But it always has Matthew, it always has Mark, always has John, always has Luke. This is quite remarkable, and it's evidence that cannot be disputed. It's evidence that smashes modern scholarship to the ground, that there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever in the manuscript tradition to suggest, not even a percentage, that it wasn't Matthew, it wasn't Mark, wasn't Luke, wasn't John. The titles themselves, as far back as they go, have always been associated with the people who wrote them. On top of that, we have found in ancient libraries that have been preserved, for example, when Pompeii excavation, there was a library near Pompeii that was found, and there are other libraries that have been found, where we discovered that plays and philosophical treatises and religious texts in ancient manuscripts from the 1st century They didn't actually write the title at the top. They actually wrote the title by a little inscription that they would stick on to the manuscript. So that explains why we don't have an original with the title on, because they were stuck on at the bottom. All right? That's another piece of evidence. So the idea that they were anonymous is nonsense. The other one is, if they were anonymous, why would you choose Mark? Why would you choose Luke? You would want to choose Peter, or you'd want to choose some major person. You wouldn't want to choose Mark and Luke. So the idea that the Gospels are anonymous, the evidence concerning the manuscript tradition, concerning the way manuscripts had titles stuck on them, and some of the names not being famous, negate this idea that they did not write it. But there's more evidence. We have Tertullian mentioned in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We have Tatian, who quotes Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We have Eusebius, who mentions Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We have Irenaeus that mentions Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We have Ignatius and Polycarp, two of our earliest sources, that are quoting Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Even the heretics, Marcion and various heretics, they often chose one gospel that they liked. So some quote Mark, some quote Luke, etc. So they're referring to the names of the people who wrote them. Not even the enemies such as Celsus, not even Celsus, not even the Gnostics, no enemy ever suggested that the authors were not Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All the data, all the evidence by the church fathers, even enemies like Celsus, and even the Gnostic Gospels quote the four Gospels. The Didache quotes the four Gospels. So the evidence that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is incontrovertible. Absolutely incontrovertible. You have also Papias, who mentions Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There is a debate, does it mean John the Elder or John? But that's a minor issue. The 99% of the data, the evidence, shows you that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote it. So that's massive evidence. The other criteria for the Gospels is what we call verisimilitude. Verisimilitude. What does verisimilitude mean? It means background information. Background information that confirms that the Gospels were written by people of that time. So, for example, if I was writing a history of Margaret Thatcher, okay, and I mentioned characters that didn't exist at that time, I mentioned places that didn't exist, I would be clear that I'm not a person who was around at the time of Margaret Thatcher. I don't really know the culture. So verisimilitude is showing you that there's background information to confirm the four Gospels were written in that time frame. So, for example, verisimilitude, number one, we have Qumran texts who debate about the law. We have Mishnah that talk about the Pharisees debating about the law. We have that information from the Qumran text. Well, what do you know? In the Gospels, we have that background information. There's often debates about how we interpret the law. For example, the issue of Sabbath day, the issue of eating. These debates are in the text of the Gospels, showing you that they have that background information of that time. Another example is Philo, who mentions the word logos. As you know, John mentions the word logos. Again, background information showing you that the Gospels were of that time. Another one is the names of the people that are mentioned in the Gospels correlate exactly to the population size of the names being used. So, for example, if just the background here, that the ossuaries, the little boxes where people were buried in, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of these ossuaries from the 1st century of Second Temple Judaism. As you calculate these ossuaries, we come up with certain names that were popular at that time, like Mary, Jesus, John, etc. Yeah, James, etc. So when you calculate the population of first century with the ossuaries, they exactly correlate to how those names would be mentioned in the first century when the Gospels were written. So, for example, if I was writing a life of a politician in Saudi Arabia, and I mentioned there were a few Mohammeds in his cabinet, that would directly correlate to the population use of names in Saudi Arabia today, because there's many people that would be called Muhammad. Now, if I was to say that there are in the cabinet of the politician in Saudi Arabia 5 Alberts on his committee for leading the country, that's obviously not going to fit Saudi Arabia population size of the names. There'd be hardly anybody called Albert in Saudi Arabia, so we would know that the person who's writing about Saudi Arabia politician does not know what he's talking about. But you see, the exact opposite is with the Gospels. They use the exact names that are in correlation to the population size. They use those exact names, which is quite remarkable. And only a person living at that time, knowing that culture, would even begin to wouldn't even realize what they're doing, but it would confirm 100% that they are people who lived at that time. Basically, background information concerning where the gates are in Jerusalem, the pools are in Jerusalem, all show verisimilitude, background information. I could go on and on and on about background information, the Qumran text, Philo, I could go on and on and on, the Mishnah, etc. What else is there? There's also scholarship that's come along and shown that there's eyewitness material in the Gospels. Ancient historians wanted to use eyewitness. They saw that as important. Polybius was a historian who said, if you can get eyewitness material, that's the best. So Luke says he got eyewitness material. Now, when they were writing, ancient writers, very often they didn't just say, like Josephus did, but many didn't. Josephus said, this is my source, this is my source. But many historians, what they do is use what is called inclusio. They would mention the name at the beginning and at the end of their writing to show where they got their eyewitness material. And they would mention certain names in their story which would indicate that's where they're getting the material. And you see that in the Gospels. Certain names are mentioned at the beginning. Certain names are mentioned in the middle and at the end. And they're made explicit. And it's to show you that this is eyewitness material being used for what they're writing. Okay? Now, this scholarship has been developed by Richard Bauckham. It shook the academic world. And even now, there's a tussle in the academic world concerning this issue. But scholarship has come along and shown that there's eyewitness material. So, what more is there to say? I've showed you enemy attestation. I've showed you verisimilitude. I've shown you eyewitness, the issue of eyewitnesses. I've shown you many, many issues concerning the reliability of the Gospels. Now, I want to just hit on a couple of issues concerning Islam and atheism and modern scholarship. There's this idea amongst scholars and amongst many people that history is neutral. History is not neutral. Everybody has a bias when they come into history. For example, C.F. Bauer, one of the great New Testament scholars of all time, was heavily influenced by Hegelian philosophy. And it's Hegelian philosophy that influenced his understanding of the New Testament. So that bias really, really disrupted and damaged his reputation and damaged his scholarship. Strauss, who wrote A Life of Christ, his presupposition is there's what he would call myth, and he used that narrative to basically de-supernaturalize the life of Jesus. Rudolf Bultmann was influenced by existential philosophy, and he used that to understand the life of Christ. And I could go on and on and on of scholar after scholar after scholar who comes with a certain bias, their certain understanding. Another example is Renan. Renan was a French theologian who wrote the life of Christ. He was what we call a romantic theologian, meaning not romance as in romance, but romantic as in desiring, believing in high passion, etc. And he wrote a life of Christ based on his romanticism, romantic philosophy. So you get these scholars, they come along and they have these theories, they have these biases. Now take the atheists. You have Michael Onfray, a French philosopher atheist. He has a philosophy, and he's made statements that are unbelievable, saying that Jesus didn't die and things like that. But it's based on his philosophy. Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, you read what they say about the life of Christ, it's not even worth reading. They're just taking Mithras ideas that nobody takes seriously in the academic world and making statements that don't really correlate to any academic studies or anything. Why? Because it's their bias. Another example is Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman would say, I don't agree with this in the Bible, that in the Bible, that in the Gospels, this in the Gospels. Right, okay. But what about, you're doing it on textual grounds? Yes, okay, Bart, you're doing it on textual grounds. But then you ask him, but what about the resurrection? I don't believe the resurrection. Why? Because I don't believe in miracles. So he discounts the resurrection, not based on any historical data, but he discounts it on the basis of his presupposition there can be no supernatural events in history, which is dogmatism. So that's an example how biased, as one of the big scholars of our time, is so biased that he can't see the wood from the trees concerning the resurrection because he's not looking at the historical evidence. Another example, he's changed his tack now, but at one time, Richard Carey, an atheist, would use the Bayes theory, which is just a mathematical formula. It's not really a formula to be used in historical inquiry, and so now he's abandoned it. Dominic Crossan is an Irishman, and he's kind of Irish socialist. So when he's writing about Jesus, what does he turn Jesus into? An Irish socialist. Okay? See how his bias is influencing his writing about Jesus. So I've demonstrated many examples of scholars coming with their biases to the historical Jesus. So the idea that looking at history is objective is not correct. And so for an example is Hamza and the Muslims. When it comes to the historical Jesus, they will do a couple of things, yeah. They will use critical scholarship of the West, but they will not allow that critical scholarship on the Quran, so there's a contradiction there. But also, they believe Jesus was not crucified. They believe from the Quran he was not crucified. They believe from the Quran that there is no such thing as Jesus being the Son of God. So by definition, when they're looking at the Gospels, they cannot accept the four Gospels. And in fact, even though the Quran says, go and read the Injil and the Torah, and when it says Injil, it's meaning the four Gospels, the Muslims will turn around and say, no, it's not the four Gospels, although classical scholarship in Islam accepted the four Gospels, by the way. That's just another point. But the Muslims will say, no, the four Gospels, the Quran does not point to the four Gospels. It's a Gospel that Jesus was given by Allah. Okay. Well, where's the primary source for this Gospel that so-called Allah gave to Jesus? There's no primary source. And yet the Muslims will attack the Christians, say your primary sources are not good. Complete dishonesty. So you can see how the Muslims will come at the Gospels with their bias. Okay? So what I'm saying is that we all are biased. We believe in inerrancy, but we're talking about historical reliability. Historical reliability is different from inerrancy. Inerrancy, we have to prove something 100%. But historical reliability is to say, well, look, there's 60-70% of this information in the Gospels is correct, so therefore it's reliable. That is all my burden of proof that I have to do. And actually, we can actually take Bart Ehrman's scholarship, and you can get Bart Ehrman's books, and you can write down, and you can get also E.P. Sanders, and you can get all the list of what Bart Ehrman believes about Jesus. And it goes past 70%. And yet, 5% of which Bart Ehrman would say, oh, the gospel narratives of the nativity and the gospel narratives of the genealogy are not correct, and there's a few contradictions in the gospels concerning the resurrection account, and so this only amounts to about 5%. Although it's an important part, it doesn't negate the 70% that Bart says is historically reliable. And that's all we have to do. If we can show that our historical reliability goes to 60-70%, then we're done. We've shown that the Gospels are reliable. But if you want to argue about inerrancy, yeah, we can do that. We can go to every dot and look at every dot, fine. But then the historian is not doing history, but doing theology. So it works both ways. When Bart Ehrman and scholars say, oh, you believe in inerrancy, you're coming with bias. Yeah, but when you're trying to prove against this inerrancy, you are showing bias because you're not doing history, you're now doing theology. Let's stick to history. Let's look at historical reliability. And even if we take your so-called intellectual tools, form criticism is damaged now, it's in the death throes, but scholars still keep holding on to it. And many of these intellectual tools that have been developed are in crisis, but scholars keep trying to keep going because they've got nothing better to do. They have to keep lecturing, they have to earn a living as academics, but they all know that these tools, intellectual tools, they kind of failed, and they've not produced what they were supposedly meant to do. So the bottom line is Bart Ehrman, using Bart Ehrman, taking what he said about Jesus, just Bart Ehrman, goes over the threshold of 70% of historical reliability. And the bits that he's questioning is only a small percentage. It's only a small percentage. And we're not arguing about inerrancy here, we're arguing about historical reliability. So we win the debate on that issue. We want to talk about inerrancy, fine, we can do that. But we're talking about historical reliability. So whichever way you cut it, we win that debate, we win that argument, hands down. I could go on and on and on, concerning the Gospel of John. There are over 50 historical facts just in the Gospel of John alone. Nobody really fully appreciates that. Luke, extremely historically reliable. Now, there are certain issues. The genealogy. Well, first of all, the genealogy of Jesus is looking at it from two different angles. Matthew is looking at it from one side of Jesus' life, Luke is looking at it from another side of Jesus' line. Mary's line, one, Joseph's line, the other. The idea that there are two different grandfathers can be explained. Africanus explains it. Other scholars have explained it. Maybe he came from one grandfather, but that grandfather died and he was adopted. Maybe the grandfather died and the wife married someone else, so and that became his grandfather. So there are examples like that. So it's not a difficulty, it's not a problem. Africanus and other ancient scholars have dealt with these issues centuries ago. So the genealogy is not a problem. But the one thing is that is a problem for the skeptics is that the Jews before 70 AD used to collect their records. They had their records. Okay, so if you're going to argue with that issue, you've got big problems. The other one is the massacre of the innocents. One of them says, oh, it was not mentioned in the history books. it was generally known. The reason why we know it was generally known is it's unwittingly mentioned by Peter in the book of Acts. And if you read that statement in the book of Acts, it's a giveaway showing you that there was a general belief in the wickedness of Herod concerning the early birth of Jesus. And everything that Herod did, killing those innocent children, is perfectly in line with Herod. Herod was a wicked man, very wicked. He killed his own children. Before he died, he wanted to get as many Jewish people in a barn and burn them alive. But thankfully, when he died, the people he told to do it didn't do it. So it's not beyond the issue. That it's not mentioned in any history books, that's an argument from silence. Just because it's not mentioned doesn't mean it didn't exist. For example, Philo doesn't mention Caiaphas, the high priest. Philo goes to Jerusalem, visits Jerusalem. Philo is a Jewish philosopher. He goes to Jerusalem, visits Jerusalem. He doesn't mention Caiaphas, the high priest. So does that mean Caiaphas didn't exist? So an argument for silence is not going to cut it. All that we know about Herod is he was well capable of killing and massacring, and there was a general belief of the wickedness of Herod concerning what he did in the early days of Jesus' life. And it's a giveaway if you read Acts chapter 2 of Peter's sermon. A lot of scholars, I think, have missed it. They've missed that secondary information concerning the massacre of the innocents. I think a lot of skeptics have missed it, and that's because they don't do due diligence to the text. They read it to confirm their bias and confirm that they want to say. So the issue that 1 minute Jesus is in Bethlehem and in the birth narrative, Joseph and Mary in Bethlehem, and then he's in Nazareth and there's a contradiction, that's answered by maybe what's it called? Just to get a bit tired, but maybe Joseph had a business in Nazareth and family in Nazareth. So there's no contradiction there. There's no problem there. They're not reading the text correctly. So that's the birth narratives. When it comes to the resurrection narratives, when he says there's one woman, then there's two women, and there's one angel, two angels, that is what historians do. They don't mention everything. They look at things from a different perspective, and they don't mention everything. So if I say there were two people, the two people talked to, say there's someone outside the shop, and I said two people talked to the shopkeeper, right? And then someone else said one person was talking to the shopkeeper. Notice none of them said there was only two people or there was only one people. It just says there were two people and one says there were one person. There's no contradiction. There's no contradiction. One's just mentioning one, the other saying there were two. They're not saying there was only two, there was only one. Then that would be a contradiction. So there's no contradiction. Okay. Then the other issue that Jesus' arrest was unlawful and his killing was unlawful. It didn't agree with what the Sanhedrin would have done. Listen, they were blinded by hate, and because they were blinded by the hate, they didn't follow their own prescription, their own laws. Simple as that. I could go on. What else is there? When historians are criticizing the Gospels, and they start to say that there's issues concerning the birth narrative or the resurrection accounts, they're not doing history, they are doing interpretation. And there's a difference. There's a difference between interpretation and history. History works on a set of parameters, a set of criteria. Interpretation is also works on a set of criteria. And when historians start criticizing the Gospels, a lot of it is to do with interpretation, not history. And so you've got to remember that. When Bart Ehrman is quoting the New Testament, he's very often not doing history, he's doing interpretation. And that means it's subjective. I mean, it's just his opinion. There can be other opinions, there can be other ways of looking at it, because his methodology is not objective. It's not the historical grammatical method. It's his subjective hermeneutical principles that he's using, that he's saying is history, which is not history. And even if you're doing history, you've got to show that you're being fair. On the dates of the Gospels, none of the Gospels mention the fall of Jerusalem, which puts the Gospels probably before 70 AD, even the Gospel of John. So I think we've done a lot of information there. Now I'm going to share with you some books. This is a book you must read, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. I was reading this for the Hamza debate. I've read it before, and I'm on page 9 at the moment. It shows you that there's eyewitness material in the Gospel. Don't agree with everything. He's still influenced by modern scholarship. Still got some presuppositions he needs to sort out. But it's very, very good scholarly work, showing you some very amazing work on the eyewitnesses of the Gospels. Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, published by Eerdmans. You need to get hold of that book. This is an excellent book. The Jesus Crisis, The Inroads of Historical Criticism in Evangelical Scholarship, published by Kriegel. This book is excellent. Modern scholarship, even in evangelical and reform circles, has been infiltrated by redaction criticism, form criticism. And it's quite shocking how deep this has come in. It's coming in a massive way. And I'm going to be doing some lectures in the next few days and weeks ahead on this issue. Form criticism, redaction criticism, and these modern intellectual tools that are cram-packed with presuppositions against the Word of God. Modern evangelical and reform scholars have taken on board. An example is Mike Licona, who says when people came out of the graves, when Jesus was resurrected, the people came out of the graves, he says that's mythological language. And Norman Geisler took him to task. But many scholars came out on the side of Licona. Blomberg, Craig Keener. These are scholars I respect. Don Carson. I respect them, but they have been infected with modern scholarship, which undermines inerrancy. So you need to read this book, The Jesus Crisis, The Inroads to Criticism to Historic Evangelical Scholarship, Robert L. Thomas and others. Get yourself this book. Very, very powerful. I've read the first essay. I was going to use this against Hamza. Just on the issue of the Q source. There's a Q. Has anybody found the document of Q? No. Nobody's found the document of Q. There is no document of Q. It's mythological. It takes away the independent witness of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to say, oh, Matthew used all of Mark. Luke used all of Mark and the Q source. Matthew used Mark and the Q source. And trying to take away the independent witness of each of the Gospels. The Q source is mythological. Can it not be that Matthew was an independent source, Luke was an independent source? Why the similarities? Maybe because the sources that they were using, the life of Jesus, they were getting correct. Maybe that's the reason, okay? So The Jesus Crisis is an excellent book, demolishing modern scholarship on these, and exposing evangelical scholarship that has been taken in by modern methods that are not helpful for inerrancy. Encyclopedia of Bible Difficulties by Gleason L. Archer, a superb book. Any apologist out there needs to get this book. Very, very helpful. You need to get yourself Zondervan Publishing. Any self-respecting apologist at Speaker's Corner, anyway, you need to get this book. Very, very helpful. Goes through many, many passages. Explains many passages. Very, very good. This book is excellent, and it covers the 4 Gospels and the canon of Scripture. Very, very helpful. A General Introduction to the Bible, Norman L. Geisler and William E. Nix, Moody Press. Brilliant, fantastic book. Extremely in-depth, fantastic. Encourage you to read it. Really, really good. Another book, nor a self-respecting scholar or apologist or debater on the New Testament can be without this book. Ancient Texts of the New Testament Studies, a guide to the background literature, Craig E. Evans. I don't agree with everything Craig E. Evans says, but this looks at all the source material of the time of Jesus that you can look at. And it goes through all the literature. Very, very helpful. Published by Baker Academic. Very, very helpful book indeed. Anybody who does debates on this topic would well worth get hold of this book. A favourite for everybody to read. You can get this for free on the internet. The New Testament documents, are they reliable? F.F. Bruce. This is a stinger of a book. Absolutely fantastic. Very encouraging. Don't agree with everything he says. 1 or 2 issues I would put a question mark. But very, very helpful. Gives a lot of detail of the historical reliability of the Gospels, especially on the Gospel of Luke. Very, very good. Excellent book. I encourage you to get hold of this. Either buy it IVP, or I would suggest that you get it on the internet for free. Just Google it. You can get a PDF. This is worth its weight in gold. Everybody should read this. Christians. And if you're a skeptic or Muslim, get hold of this. Very, very, very good. I read this for the debate where Hamza enjoyed it immensely, made notes on it, but where is Hamza? We don't know. Doesn't want to debate. And then finally, the creme de la creme, Jesus and the Manuscripts by Craig Evans. Excellent book. Shows you that manuscripts were often used for 200 years, which means that if Matthew, Mark, Luke and John were written, maybe they existed for 100 years or 200 years, being copied and copied and copied. Craig A. Evans, excellent work, published by Hendrickson Academic. I don't agree with everything Craig Evans says, but this is very useful and very helpful academic work. So that's some of the scholarship. I also want to recommend another book. Nothing to do with the 4 Gospels in one sense, but A Modern Exposition of the 1689. Why do I recommend this book? Because I am sick and tired, sick to death, of seeing so many internet apologists, Speaker's Corner apologists, and internet apologists that don't know the theology. They don't study theology. Inspiring Philosophy, he is heretical in his theology on the doctrine of the atonement. He doesn't believe in penal substitution. It's bad. It's really, really bad. Some of these apologists on the internet, they don't have the basic Christian theology because they don't study theology. So you need, if you're doing apologetics at Speaker's Corner, at least get a basic understanding of theology. Get yourself a copy of this and read it. Samuel E. Waldron, A Modern Exposition of the Baptist Confession, 1689. Get a copy of it, please. Do yourself a favor and study theology instead of waffling on, thinking you're defending the faith and you don't even know the basics. So there we are. That's a 101 off the top of my head. The historical reliability of the Gospels. These are some of the arguments that I'd have brought to Hamza. It would have been, if he was debating, it would have been in about 4 weeks' time. I was developing my argument and whatever. I will try it and give a lecture maybe the end of the month or in about 6 weeks. I'll give a lecture on it in more detail. Those are the kind of arguments that he would have got, and he would not have been able to deal with it. He would not have been able to deal with all the arguments that I was going to bring. And so why doesn't want to debate, I don't know, but we all knew that it was coming. We all knew that he wasn't really serious about it. So there we are. So you Muslims out there, this is what your Muslim apologists do. They run away from debate. I could challenge Muhammad Hijab now. What's his name? The Muslim historian guy, Adan, Mansour, Ijaz. I can challenge all of them. Not one of them will take up the debate concerning the historical reliability of the gospel. Not one. I challenge them openly now. Ijaz Ahmed, Adan, Ijaz, Mansour, I challenge you. Hamza doesn't want to debate. He's busy. He's busy. Doesn't want to debate? Fine. I challenge all of you to a debate on the historical reliability of the Gospels. I give Hamza, I said, name the time, name the place. You can have Mansour, please put Mansour. It can be on your show. I give him all the cards. I give him all the cards. And he still doesn't want to debate. He's busy. He's busy. Okay, he's busy. Why say you want to debate when you're busy? So I ask you, Muhammad Hijab, I ask you, Ijaz, I ask you, Mansour, debate on the historical reliability of the Gospels. And not one of them will debate me, not one. Not because I'm clever. I'm not clever. I'm just an ordinary guy. But they won't, because they know that if they debate me, I will bring some facts to the table, and they don't want people to hear those facts. They don't want people to look at those facts, because their Quran will be exposed and their faith will be exposed, and they don't want that. So you Muslims out there, look at your Muslim apologists, how dishonest they are. When Mansour is challenged, when Muhammad Hijab is challenged, when they are challenged, they don't want to face Christian apologists. They don't want to face them. They'd rather pick on Christians that don't know anything so they can look good and they can look great. They don't want to debate our debaters. There's debaters out there at Speaker's Corner. There's a new generation. I don't agree with their theology, like Roman Catholic stuff. I don't agree with that at all. I think that's way off the mark. It's not sound. But there are a number of apologists at Speaker's Corner that are very, very able to debate and debunk Islam, and these Muslim apologists will not debate them. So a number of young guys who are showing amazing ability, and there's some of the old guard there, and they're not willing to debate them. They don't want to debate Chris, they don't want to debate Bob the Builder, they don't want to debate. There's a number of young ones that have come up. They don't want to debate them. So, what's going on? Your Muslim apologists are chickens. Your Muslim apologists are liars. Your Muslim apologists are cowards. They cannot face proper, strong debaters who can give solid evidence, solid information. They cannot deal with it. And you Muslims out there have to see that you need Jesus Christ. You need the Lord. You need to put your faith in Jesus. You need to trust Jesus. Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus said, I'm the light of the world. Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. Jesus says, he is the water of life. Jesus says, you need to be born again. John the Baptist says, behold the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. You need Jesus Christ as a Muslim in your life. And your Muslim apologists are cowards. They are liars and cowards. And you can't see it. You can't see it because you're blinded by rhetoric, by people who pick on young Christians and take on young Christians and do not take on Christian debaters who know what they're talking about. And I will tell you this now, I am not the best debater. My last debate with Ben was not the best debate, because I was very, very gentle, very subdued, and also he turned up late and it just put me off, and I wasn't really too keen with that debate. Once saved, always saved. It was not my best debate. But you will find in my career, in the history of the internet, and I've been on the internet now maybe 10, 12 years, whether it's atheist or Muslim, never, ever, ever has the Muslims or the atheist ever given me a third chance in debate. There's never ever been a time where a proper debate was set up, whether at a university or on the internet, where we say, right, Jay, you can debate one of our best debaters fairly on this topic, and it's going to be equal time. There's not going to be any interruption. There's not going to be any problems. You can debate fairly on that. Never have the atheists or the Muslims done that with me. Why? So if I ever do debate, there's always 5 on the show. There's always interruptions. There's always some manipulation going on behind the scenes. Always. Never in 12 years at least of debating have I ever had a fair opportunity to debate my ideas of my faith. And the reason is that the Muslims and the atheists and the enemies of the gospel know that if they give me the time and day, I'm going to give solid evidences for the faith. And though I'm not the cleverest, they don't want the truth to be known. And so they'd rather keep me in the dark. And that's fine. But remember, as Muslims, this Christian apologist has never ever been defeated in debate, ever. That you've never had Muslim apologists debate me in a fair way. It's never happened. And if it ever happened, it would not go well for you. Not because I'm the cleverest. I'm not the cleverest, no. But I am the most conscientious. I will come with you the latest scholarship, and I'll give it to you from the hip, and they don't want that. And as Muslims, young Muslims, I want you to remember that. Never in the history of my debates with Muslims have I ever been given a third chance. Always been interrupted. Always had more people interrupting me on the internet or at Speaker's Corner. It's never been fair. And that shows you that their side is not truthful. Their side is not right. Their side is false. Their side doesn't have anything to back up. And that's a fact. So I've done now. If I continue this topic, it'll be in a month or 2 months' time. Google Jason Burns lecture on Bultmann. I've done at least 3 lectures on Rudolf Bultmann. Go and listen to them. That will strengthen your faith. Okay? That will strengthen your faith. That kind of deals. And there's lots of videos that I've done on the resurrection, on the historical reliability of the Gospels. I've done many, many, many videos on these things, and there's lots of videos there if you want to plunge in, study. There's loads of videos that I've done on the historical reliability of the Gospels, on the resurrection. I've done 3 to 4 hours lecture on that. So I've done a lot of stuff. So there we are. I'm done. I'm going to focus on the mission work here and get on with things. I've done my best. Hamza didn't want to debate, so that's okay. Leave him be. I'm not going to hassle him or whatever. So God bless you. Love to everybody out there. Have a lovely, happy new year. And keep praying for me. It's been a bit difficult over the holiday. I've been thinking about my mum. A few tears have come from my eyes, so please pray for me. Pray for my wife. She returns from Accra soon. And just pray that we go forward in the mission work. We need supporters. I'm not going to go on about it at the moment. I'm just going to pray. But we need supporters. We need help to do the mission work. So pray for us. And I hope this video has been an encouragement to you, a help to you, a strength to you, that I've put all this scholarship into your lap. And I hope that it blesses you and encourages you and helps you, sustains you and strengthens you in your faith. So God bless you. Love to everybody out there. God bless. Bye.